if you are a civilization out there and you're using bow and arrows and your enemy civilization adopts or discovers gunpowder, then it doesn't matter if you disapprove gunpowder. It doesn't matter if you disagree with gunpowder. They can come over and they can quickly kill you. I think Bitcoin is no different from an economic perspective.
I wrote The Bible and Bitcoin for you, Bible-believing Christian, and in it I lay out the biblical basis for what money is, why our current fiat monetary system is ungodly, and how Bitcoin is the best and most viable, biblically compliant replacement for government fiat money. There's even a small group study guide in the back with additional resources to study with your church small group. Get it on Amazon or pay with Bitcoin at thebibleandbitcoin.com for a discount. Welcome to another episode of the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. I'm your host, Alan Armstrong, aka Pastor Coin, and today we have a special guest, Joe Burnett. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I've been following you for a while, and your content is very informative, very in-depth analysis of different things, mainly Bitcoin, but you get into some other macro stuff as well, and it's very well researched. But before we get on to that technical stuff, there was a tweet you did on October 26, 2020. I did some digging. And it was a very short tweet, but it was powerful. It said, Jesus would have been a Bitcoiner. Debt slavery is evil. So could you unpack a little bit on what you mean by debt slavery? Like, I get the feeling it's about the fiat monetary network. How is the fiat system debt slavery, and why do you think Jesus would oppose it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I somewhat remember tweeting that, but I'll dive into my current thoughts today. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people don't understand, like, the fiat monetary system is debt-based money, meaning like that's just how the banking system works. The dollars in your checking account or your savings account are effectively someone else's mortgage or someone else's car loan. Maybe it's like packaged together into some sort of like mortgage-backed security or some other security that's holding a lot of debt from someone else. But effectively, that's what money is today. Money is debt. And the way the fiat monetary system works is you have consumer price inflation. So you need the dollar units within the fiat monetary system to continue debasing over time and becoming less valuable compared to basic consumer goods. And you have all this debt out there in the world that's effectively our money, which means we need to actually keep creating more and more of this debt by design, just how the system works, in order to keep debasing the money against basic consumer goods. And so it's like a system that's built on creating more and more and more and more and more debt, no matter if the world needs that debt or if the market really demands that debt. It's like we just need to issue debt to issue debt to keep this fiat monetary system going. So I don't think that's the best way to run a system. One is like kind of trying to centrally plan money itself and debt itself, which I don't think is the correct way to go about building an economic system. And then two, it's like I think like there is some like evilness to debt, especially like being over indebted, whether it's like predatory lending to people that shouldn't be borrowing the money to buy consumer goods that are depreciating over time. Like maybe they shouldn't have that the ability to buy $100,000 car, and when they can't really afford that. And also like it kind of incentivizes overindulging in basic consumer goods. It's like, borrow the $500,000, buy the house in the suburbs or whatever. And yeah, of course, the house is going to go up over time. So you can borrow more than maybe you thought that you should be borrowing. So I don't think that that's good either. And I think it'd just be better if we lived in a world where people, had good money, they saved that money, and you didn't have to go into debt. Like, I also think like now, large corporations or even small businesses, if you kind of want to stay ahead or you want to keep growing as a company, you need to borrow debt to buy assets, and those assets are going to go up because they're more scarce and more desirable than basic consumer goods, which again the dollar is designed to debase against those basic consumer goods. And so you're effectively like incentivized to go into as much debt as possible, buy all these relatively scarce assets, and then just know that in the future that we're going to have to create more dollars via more debt creation, and the game kind of keeps going on and on. So it's kind of like a system of very whack incentives, and I don't think that that's like a good way to build a financial system.
So why do you think Jesus would oppose that specifically? I mean, it's obvious, but I want to hear your answer.
Yeah. So my view, I guess it's a good question. My view is like he wants people to like have a lower time preference, right? And to like think more for the future. And so it's like the story of Adam and Eve, and Adam or and Eve eating the apple. Like they wanted, short-term wisdom and kind of dopamine defying, God's command, and to not eat the apple. Whereas in the world of debt, it's incentivizing to eat the apple. Like you have to go out there and consume that car, or consume that house, or consume that vacation on your credit card. Or if you're an investor, it's like, maybe this is not a great investment, but you're like, hey, I need to borrow money and buy this real estate, this building, even though that's, may not be the best use of capital at the moment, but you're incentivized to do it. So yeah, I think it encourages high time preference behavior, and I think that Jesus like wants people to think long out into the future, and even past their earthly days, to think more of not just their 80 to 100 years that they'll have on earth. If they're lucky, they'll be able to think far out into the future, like for eternity.
Yeah, so if dollars are debt, right? Dollars are debt. Then who's the who's the one who's the who's indebted? Basically, I think I get this question a lot. Like, okay, so because I'll tell people the dollar is just debt, right? So the system is literally built on debt. But if that's the case, then who cares? Because who are we indebted to, and why does it matter?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question, right? Like, so who holds debt? Well, one, if you have dollars in your bank account, you are someone that holds some of the debt. So you're like issuing the loans on behalf of someone else. Um, and to some extent, it's like we all kind of hold the debt. Like you'll hear actually like Paul Krugman say that, and like to some extent, he's kind of right. Like someone kind of ends up holding the bag, and like they hold some working capital of cash that's highly liquid, and they need to use that cash to spend to consume things or invest things. So to some extent, it is us that we hold the debt. If you have cash or T bills, or you are a retiree and you're like, hey, NASDAQ and the S&P 500 scare me. I want to hold a longer term corporate bond or longer term treasury bond that pays me 5% interest or 6% or whatever it would be. Then that's who holds the debt. The other people that hold the debt are like pension funds, right? Like they know exactly how much money they're going to owe for the next 10 years or 20 years, depending on like who's enrolled in the pension fund. So like if they know exactly what they will need to pay out, they might as well just match it with an asset that is promises to pay out like that specific amount. Whereas like Bitcoin is it's just money, and if you buy Bitcoin, there's no guarantee that you're going to get back $100,000 or $60,000 in a year. It's a bare asset with no counterparty risk. And so to some extent, like a lot of different people hold the debt, and probably some of us, if we still happen to have dollars, which I have a checking account as well.
Well, it doesn't sound like a system that is well equipped to build a prosperous future on, and I think that's why you wrote this report that you sent me called "Your Wealth is Melting." And I read that title and I went, "Yikes, that doesn't sound good." So I did read the report, and it was good. It was shocking. It was informative, and it also leaves you with a sense of hope. Like there is a huge problem, but there's a great solution to the problem. So could you give a brief overview, maybe some of the key points, the TLDR of that report you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I wrote this report, Your Wealth is Melting. I think it's like 37 pages or something. So definitely encourage anyone to check it out if they wish to read it in detail. But the point of writing the report was, I think a large majority of the world looks at Bitcoin completely the wrong way. They view Bitcoin as this highly speculative lottery ticket that could be worth millions one day, or is most likely in their mind worth zero. It's just this digital pet rock. And I think that's absolutely like the worst way to think about Bitcoin. I think that the better way to think about Bitcoin is it's actually the best form of money that humanity has ever discovered. So I think they're right in the sense that it could one day be worth millions of dollars or whatever we think of as millions of dollars today. But there's also very small probability that it just completely fails and doesn't work or somehow not good money. So the point of the report is actually using Bitcoin as money to evaluate your wealth, right? Like today, wealthy people around the world, they know that they can't just sit on a bunch of dollars in their checking account or under their mattress or even in their savings account. They know they have to go out there and buy a bunch of high quality assets like real estate, like stocks, S&P 500, NASDAQ, NVIDIA at this point, any sort of, high quality asset, gold, even bonds. And so the point of this report was to go back and evaluate each of those assets and kind of show that we are able to create more of these assets. You'll hear like Jeff Booth talk about, technology deflation when it comes to basic consumer goods. Like the dollar, like I mentioned earlier, is this fiat monetary unit of account that's effectively pegged to basic consumer goods. And the dollar is getting debased against these basic consumer goods. And in the report, I kind of talk about how we're able to make these basic consumer goods more and more effectively in a more and more productive manner over the last 100 plus years. So the dollar is kind of like a double loss scenario where not only are you losing value against these goods, but these goods are becoming incredibly abundant over time. And then so it kind of goes a step further and it says, well, this concept of technology deflation doesn't necessarily just apply to basic consumer goods. It applies to our financial assets that we hold and store wealth in today. Same thing applies to gold. Yes, of course, like we're able to create calculator apps a lot more faster and more efficiently and cheaper than a gold bar. But over time, if you look at like the chart of annual gold production, it's also up and to the right. Like we're able to create more and more gold than was even imaginable back in the year like 1800 or 1700. So it applies to gold. It applies to real estate. We're able to build real estate faster, more efficiently with less man hours. And the real estate is obviously a lot nicer.
Can you let the Canadian government know that's possible?
Yeah, fair. I guess government also can get in the way and make it a little bit more difficult to build real estate in certain areas. But yeah, so it applies to real estate. And not only that, I think it applies to stocks. Like take Nvidia as an example. Right now, humanity stores like $3 trillion worth of wealth in real estate. If you think back to gold, it's like when humanity stores $15 trillion worth of wealth in gold, that's a massive economic incentive to go out there and mine more gold. When humanity stores $3 trillion worth of wealth in NVIDIA, that's a massive economic incentive for people to go out and create more GPUs that are either more efficient, that are cheaper, or create a better solution. Maybe I saw this on Twitter today, maybe create an AI ASIC where it's like training these models based on a very specific chip that you create, and then the chip can only train that specific AI model, but it's like 100 times or 1,000 times more efficient than one of NVIDIA's GPUs. So like when humanity stores $3 trillion worth of wealth in NVIDIA, and effectively what they're doing is they're storing that wealth in NVIDIA's future profits, then there's going to be competition that comes in and tries to naturally take those future profits. And so all of these financial assets that we hold today have this problem of, competition wants to come in, or the free market just naturally wants to create more of those assets, real estate, gold, Nvidia, whatever. But Bitcoin is kind of this one unique monetary asset that this doesn't apply to, right? Like no matter how much energy or time is spent, we can't create more than 21 million Bitcoin. And then we also can't debase Bitcoin via competition, because the whole purpose of money is to converge on one common tool for savings and trade. And so if you pick the second best tool, Bitcoin's competition, there's really no point in doing that, because it's useless. Like the whole point of money is to pick the first best tool so you can all converge on one common tool for savings and trade. So Bitcoin's kind of this one unique asset that we can't melt away, whereas everything else, they're all melting away very slowly, and it's happening at a faster and faster rate with globalization. We're all becoming more interconnected via technology and the internet. We're advancing rapidly as a civilization, and Bitcoin's kind of the way to potentially store wealth without it melting in the future.
Now, I know it's hard to think about something that doesn't exist, but do you ever think about a technology in the future that might be better than Bitcoin? I mean, right now, Bitcoin is the best money humans have ever had. And like I said, it's hard to think about something that doesn't exist, but does that ever cross your mind? Like, okay, this is a technology that's amazing, but who's to say a better technology doesn't arise that competes?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And there's like a few different ways to approach it, because Bitcoin, is not, like Michael Saylor has been calling it perfect money. I don't fully like that analogy, to be totally honest. I think it's perfectly scarce money. Like there's only going to be 21 million. That's correct, as long as there's not a bug. So in that sense, it's like perfect scarcity, as in like you can't create any more as long as it doesn't break, which I think that's fair. But Bitcoin is not perfect money in the sense maybe it could be more private, maybe it could be more scalable, maybe it could be a bunch of other things that we can't even imagine today. Programmable, I don't know. But I think when it comes to the core idea of what money is one, is it perfectly scarce? I think that's a massive one. You can't really make that better, I think, without sacrificing something else. Like Ethereum tried to become ultrasound money. They tried to make it better, but I don't think that that's a good answer, because they're effectively making it better by burning transaction fees and using that to make the supply go down, which just means okay, then Ethereum is not scaling as well if people are paying massively for transaction fees. So it's not really a good fair trade-off. And then I also think the initial proof of work distribution for Bitcoin was critical in making Bitcoin acceptable or adoptable per se. If you had the example of all 21 million got mined by Satoshi in the first block, I think Bitcoin probably would have failed. No one's going to go out, Satoshi's effectively pre-mined the whole thing, and then he has to go sell it to people and convince them to buy it. And if he doesn't sell, then effectively Bitcoin's either worth infinity or zero, because if someone's trying to buy it and he's not selling it, then what is it worth? It may be worth infinity, but then doesn't really make any sense. It's not really useful. So I think the programmatic distribution schedule over time was super critical to Bitcoin's adoption, and it kind of encourages Bitcoin to get distributed. It encourages the whole system become effectively more scarce over time, as there's just less Bitcoin out there to be mined, which enables the price, in my opinion, to go higher over time, because there's just less miners selling Bitcoin just as time goes on. And in Bitcoin terms, in dollar terms, it keeps going up, at least as of right now. So yeah, I think those are two key things. You can't make it more perfectly scarce, and you also can't. And also the initial proof of work distribution was very critical. So if you tried to replicate that right now, say you created something that's infinitely more scalable than Bitcoin today, and it had the same distribution schedule and whatnot, I still don't think that would necessarily work very well, because we already have Bitcoin, it already works. And if someone actually did create some sort of crazy scalability technology, then there's no reason that we can't just adopt that into Bitcoin if it's truly that good. And most of the time in the world of crypto, people claim that they've created something that's really good. In reality, there's just some trade-off that they, are overlooking. So yeah, I mean, like Bitcoin's not perfect. Nothing's really perfect, especially on Earth. But I don't see it. I see it as like a very, very low probability that something can become better. And it's like if something actually does become better, then we can just really roll it into Bitcoin, and that just becomes Bitcoin. Because the big idea is just a perfectly scarce ledger. And how can you really make a perfectly scarce ledger more perfectly scarce? You can't.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I see it too. Is if something, if some feature or whatever technology is an improvement, it's just going to get rolled into the best one, the most trustworthy, secure technology, which is Bitcoin. So, but again, like I don't know the future. Nobody knows the future, but that's just sort of how I think it would play out. But I'm no prophet. So for now, and I agree with you that Bitcoin's not perfect. I'm not really on board with that idea, calling it perfect, which is why I like to say Bitcoin is the best money we have. It's just the best option. There's nothing is better than it. Nothing has been better than it. It's not perfect, but it's the best option, and we should always go with the best option. In your report, you talk about a thing called, I've never heard this term before. It was really interesting, called the innovation trap. And as I'm reading the report, I'm going, yeah, this is a good point. A lot of people do get trapped by innovation. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, what is the innovation trap? Let the people know what is the innovation trap, and how can we leverage it to our own benefit? How can we steward it so that in a wise way?
Yeah, for sure. I think the good kind of description of the innovation trap is thinking about like something like Nvidia, where it's like people love the idea of investing in Nasdaq and high growth and thinking that that's going to keep that's going to be very good for preserving wealth over the very long term. And I think that that's has been accurate in the past, and like to some extent it is accurate as long as you like keep jumping from the next thing to the next thing. But that's the problem is like today Nvidia, their business model appears to be great. It has good margins. It is growing very rapidly, and so you're investing in this massive innovation. But what that does is it just encourages more entrepreneurs to go out there and figure out how to build a better GPU. It's like kind of like I mentioned, Nvidia is a $3 trillion bounty on being able to create a better GPU or create some other technology that enables people to train their AI large language models or any sort of AI model faster and more efficiently than NVIDIA GPUs do. Maybe it's a software upgrade, right? Like maybe like someone comes out with a better software algorithm that effectively trains the models 10 times faster. And then all of a sudden, whoever created that software is kind of like the guy that, or the company that can extract the profits from the market. And then NVIDIA is just kind of like becomes like their GPUs become like more of a commodity, and they can't charge high prices and be able to produce them for cheap amount. So yeah, like the general idea is just like we want to invest in innovation, but then the innovation kind of incentivizes more innovation, and then we get trapped into investing in innovation. We have to keep jumping from which innovation to which innovation, when in reality you're just looking for one best money that doesn't debase and can't get debased no matter how much innovation exists. And effectively, that's Bitcoin.
Your family, your nation, and your world needs strong men. The devil wants men weak, emasculated, and addicted to porn. This is why I designed the Slaying the Beast course to help men take back the dominion porn stole from them. This course will help you discover your identity as God's image, how porn leverages and twists that against you, and how with God's help you can turn the tables on the beast and live free. There's also access to a Discord server where you can have fellowship with others in the fight. You do not have to wait any longer to conquer this beast once and for all. Go to lifegiverchurch.net to get started today. Yeah, when I was reading the report, I was thinking, man, shouldn't it be easy enough shouldn't it be this easy? You work, you earn money, you save money. And then if you have excess, you can invest in things you believe in or in innovations that you think are going to make the world a better place. But instead, it's almost like gambling. Like the average person, how are they supposed to know NVIDIA is going to do what NVIDIA did,
Hmm.
right? No average Joe like if you walked on the street and you talked to the average person, you said, "Hey, dummy, you should have invested in NVIDIA." How are they supposed to know? They're out here working, busting their butts, trying to make a living. Who has time for all this? So, how do you see that? Um, I don't want to call it a dichotomy, but how do you view that whole thing of like people have to gamble now, essentially, or guess, and who has the time to do all this research to try to pick the best one and jump from innovation to innovation? Like, for example, you could have been a big fan of Ask Jeeves and missed Google. I mean, it's essentially the same thing, isn't it? But you missed Google because of Ask Jeeves.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree, right? It's like we don't have a adequate way to save wealth into the future today, so we are the default forced to chase yield and to try to find the best thing. But like it also comes back to like free markets and capitalism in general, where people are best when they specialize in one thing, and then we all trade and share with each other our one thing that we're good at. And it's like, how do you expect someone to be a doctor or a lawyer or any sort of occupation, and then also be an expert in picking like which technology stock is going to go to the moon in the next 5 years or so? Like it's two separate skills. And like, yes, you can say like, well, you have analysts and you can buy the index, but I still don't think that necessarily cuts it. Like, what's a better solution is just having a good money. Like then that cuts. You don't need to hire another middleman or another financial firm to outsource that work for you. You can just save the good money, and that's how you save for the future. And so I think that that's kind of like what's going to happen over the next 20 years is people are going to recognize that, hey, actually I don't have to own 10 rental properties to retire, or I don't have to own Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon, and that's my retirement. Like people are going to learn that you can actually just save Bitcoin, and it's actually if you, from my perspective, it's a lot less risky. Like there's no management team at Bitcoin, there's no CEO at Bitcoin, there's no earnings they have to hit, there's no, in my opinion, there's no real competition for Bitcoin. It's like you can't really make, like we talked about, you can't really make a better Bitcoin. So there's just a lot less execution risk over the next 10 years of what Bitcoin will be. It's going to be the same thing. Like there's still only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. And I think that that's going to be great for anyone that's looking to save Bitcoin for the future. And it makes it to where people, again, like they just don't have to chase yield forever and ever and keep jumping from one innovation to the next.
So there's a lot of talk about savings. We need a savings technology, and Bitcoin is the best one for that. And that's really important. I think savings has kind of taken a back seat to just surviving for most people. So how do you view Bitcoin? Do you view Bitcoin primarily as a savings technology, as an investment, as both, or something else altogether, or all of the above?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess one, it kind of depends on who you're talking to. Like obviously normal people are going to perceive it as investment. Generally I would say it's savings technology. And I think that that's going to be more obvious over time that that's just what it is. Because and I guess it kind of confuses some people because one, Bitcoin is hyper volatile right now. Not just like right at the moment, but over the last 15 years, ever since Bitcoin existed, it's been hyper volatile. And I think one of the reasons why it's hyper volatile is because we're actively monetizing Bitcoin from zero. And so, if Bitcoin's going to go from zero to $1 trillion in total market cap, then there's going to be a lot of hyper volatility, especially if it happens in only 15 years. Like that's 200%. Like if you're starting from like 1 cent or whatever, it's like 200% compound annual growth rate, which is just absolutely insane. Like that's not going to happen in a perfect exponential line. People are going to start front running the 200% gain, and then it's going to go up 1,000%, and then it's going to get ahead of itself, and no one's really going to understand what it was, and then it's going to crash back down 80%, then it's going to go up another 1,000%. So I think the volatility like confuses people, and they think it's more of the speculative investment, kind of like I mentioned at the start. Like I think people view it as like this lottery ticket, this crazy speculative investment, like Nvidia. And again, I don't think that it's the right way to think about it. It's like more accurately, maybe in the short term, that's right, because it is hyper volatile. I don't know what Bitcoin's going to be worth 12 months from now, but I think 4 years or 5 years from now, Bitcoin's going to be worth significantly more than it is today, especially since, in my opinion, we're still in the very early stages of monetization. So honestly, it's somewhat both. If you are like trying to invest in the monetization of Bitcoin or trying to invest in the adoption, but like if the rate of adoption just remains the same, or we enter the post hyper Bitcoinization world, it's definitely more like savings technology where it just goes up. Natural technology deflation pushes prices down, and people just save for the future. And I definitely think that's even today. As long as you have a long time horizon, that's the best way to think about Bitcoin is just longer duration savings technology.
How do you see general technological innovation enhancing or hurting maybe quality of life for humans in the next century? Because I feel like there's two trajectories here. I posted this on Twitter the other day. It's like technology is either going to make us uber free and prosperous, or it can be used by the government to make us the most oppressed we've ever been. So we have this fork in the road. Where are we going here? What's your outlook on how technology is gonna, as it's rapidly getting developed, affect human quality of life?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first I would say like no one really knows what's going to happen here. Like I can speculate on what I think might happen and what I want to happen. I guess my view would be like I'm just naturally an optimistic person, and I think that like looking back over the last 500 years, I think technology has made the world like an exceptionally better place than it was before. The quality of life, in my view, over the last 500 years is significantly better, and I think that to expect that trend to maybe like reverse or not continue, I think is not necessarily the best way to look at it. Like one example that I saw the other day was like a $500 drone or something took out a $5 million tank. And so I think that while technology will continue to make surveillance more effective or like attacks more effective, it'll also continue to make defense more protective. And I think that that's kind of like a general trend that we'll see over time is like attack technology will get better, but then like attack technology will like result in a stalemate to where like if Russia has nukes and US has nukes, then we're not going to launch nukes at each other. But then maybe we're going to come up with some sort of like anti-nuke technology that completely like destroys nukes in the short term. Maybe the same thing happens with privacy. Like I don't know exactly like how that would look, but I would imagine like if we come up with some sort of crazy surveillance state apparatus, maybe we're like cryptography is a great example. Bitcoin is kind of a good example of like, hey, here's another technology that came out to kind of fight back against that naturally fights back against this surveillance state that occurs. So yeah, who knows exactly how it's going to play out, but I tend to be an optimist and think that Bitcoin and technology in general is going to make the world a significantly better place in the future. It will be volatile probably because it's going to be happening super fast at a faster rate than we've ever seen before. And also another thought that kind of comes to mind is like people could get like very powerful, and like that could be somewhat good and somewhat bad. Like the gunpowder or whatever. If you have a pistol, like that's good and it enables you to defend people or defend yourself, but it also enables you to attack someone and kill them pretty easily. Imagine if somehow everyone had a nuclear weapon, you could just click on your computer and print a nuclear weapon. Like obviously that's super far out there and that would require technology doing some pretty crazy things, but it's potentially theoretically possible. And so like that could be a very dangerous world, at least in the short term, until we somehow come up with a good defense strategy for that. So my view is like it's going to be volatile, not just like in prices of things, but just in like how the world works. And who knows exactly how it's going to play out, but I tend to hope that the world would be a significantly better place. I also think it's somewhat inevitable. Like there's not really anything that we can do to stop it. Like you'll hear people talk about, I guess, the acceleration is that camp, and then you'll have like the decel camp of people trying to like slow AI, slow technology. I mean, I think one of the worst things that could probably happen is like United States decides to slow technology advancements or try to prevent people from working on things, and then other countries, maybe like China, go out there and try to build, this crazy weapons or crazy AI technologies, and now all of a sudden we work for them, and we can't even defend ourselves because we haven't been working on stuff like that. So I think it's somewhat inevitable, and like the market is going to try to find more efficient ways to go out there and build new technology and solve problems, and it's just going to happen. And we're kind of on the ride, and we're going to get to see how it plays out.
It sounds like you're describing a digital war for freedom, and I think you're right. I think it is inevitable when people talk about, because in the circles I run in, a lot of people talk about CBDCs and using cash. You got to use cash to stop the CBDCs, and I kind of shake my head and I say, guys, you know that the cash is just like a physical CBDC. You're not going to stop the system within the system. It's pointless to even try that strategy. I think CBDCs are inevitable. They're going to happen, but we have a choice. We have Bitcoin. So don't fight CBDCs with paper CBDC. Fight it with Bitcoin, with the technology that is superior. So I think we are. I don't think we're headed into. I think we are in this digital warfare already. Maybe at the beginning of the war, and things will heat up. But my hope is in Christ, and I think the future is headed in a good place. And I think God will prevail, and freedom will prevail. Is my hope. That's where I rest my hope.
Yeah, I agree. And a thought I had on CBDC is like a lot of people, and cash in general, a lot of people think cash is like censorship resistant technology. And like in some ways they're right. Like if I hand you a $20 bill, it's hard as long as there's like no cameras around us. Like no one necessarily saw that exchange. But I would argue that it's not really censorship resistant, because the government can just go out there tomorrow and dilute your share of the total amount of cash in the market, and then it's effectively, I just handed you nothing. Like maybe it was worth $20 today, but if they dilute you enough, it's worth zero. So like they can still take your cash and take your wealth, even if no one saw the transaction.
Not only that, they can literally just void that note. They can just go, and the president can go on TV tomorrow and say, or the Fed chair or whoever runs the show there, and just say, all the notes in circulation are void. You must use this one. And then what? Literally, it's over. You can't use that money anymore. No one's going to accept it. So, yeah, as long as the government is centrally controlling it, it is not censorship resistant, and it is not something we need to be using. Although we have no choice at this point. We're kind of held at gunpoint, literally and figuratively. But again, that's why we say thank God for Bitcoin, that we have this tremendous technology where we can opt out and do so in a peaceful way. So you said in your report, I'm going to read a quote here. In a world with a fixed money supply, prices must decrease as abundance increases, accurately reflecting the new technology, market efficiency, and reduced cost of production. So I read that and I was like, wow, there's some hope, right? I mean, imagine if we lived in a world where prices decreased and we became more productive and life got better, instead of prices increasing and productivity taking a hit and people suffering. So it sounds great, but how do you respond to people who might retort back saying something like, look, if you don't increase the money supply, it's going to be like this scarce amount of money, these units, whatever it is, are going to be hoarded by a few people, and then the rest of the people are just going to be out of luck and they're going to be poor. And we're back at square one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I purposely didn't try to are you talking about the deflation is bad type argument, or are you referring to okay, just generally? Okay, yeah. No, so in the report I kind of purposely didn't necessarily talk about that, because I think if you because my goal with the report was to basically convince you that you need some Bitcoin in your portfolio because your other assets are melting away. And if you get to that point in the argument and you're like, wait a second, like Bitcoin's going to become so valuable, like everyone's going to just have to hoard it forever, and it's going to be 100% of everyone's portfolio, and all of a sudden the economy collapses. Like you're basically like the most bullish person on Bitcoin, in the world, because you're saying that we're going to buy it forever. And I think that's, I think like this, like they're not right in the sense that, the economy is going to collapse, but they're right in the sense that everyone needs a massive allocation to Bitcoin. But I also think it's like kind of terrible Keynesian nonsense. It's like people, in free markets in general, it doesn't make sense to centrally plan the money or centrally plan any product or service, like the prices of those things. Like, any basic economist would say, like, don't centrally plan the market for pencils. Like, that's a terrible idea. Yet for some reason, money is this market that we think we all need to or that one small group of people needs to centrally plan. And for some reason, in all other markets, we're all better off if we specialize and just let capitalism work. Whereas in the market for money, for some reason that's not the case. And if we all use the best money that doesn't get diluted, then we're all just capitalism ceases to exist, and we don't trade with each other, and it all fails, which doesn't make any sense. And also, like it's interesting because again, like you're basically saying that Bitcoin is going to go up so much that no one's going to invest or consume anything, and it's two opposite things, because you're saying Bitcoin's going to infinity, but then at the same time you're like, all the businesses are shutting down, so Bitcoin's going to zero. It's like you kind of need to make up your mind of like which is actually happening. And in reality, there's just going to be market signals out there. Like maybe there's going to be bad investments that won't exist on a Bitcoin standard. Maybe like Bird Scooter or something like never would have gotten started, and we would have been allocating those resources and those software engineers to building other more productive, longer term, like things that have a longer time horizon to help more people, rather than like basic consuming a scooter on a sidewalk for like the next 5 years, and then the scooter gets dumped in the river or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to make people be like, obviously think more long term when it comes to like consuming houses, cars, whatnot. They're not going to just buy things they don't need, and then invest in businesses are going to be more selective. So I think you can actually make the argument that the economy will get a lot more efficient because we're not going to be wasting collectively on a bunch of consumption items, and the businesses out there aren't going to be wasting and investing in anything that pops up in front of them. They're going to be a lot more selective at what they invest in. And so reality, it's like there's a lot less mindless consumption, and then there's also a higher hurdle rate when it comes to investments, which means like your investment needs to get a higher return than the other investments that you were pursuing. So effectively, like we're just going to pursue really good investments instead of all these non-bad investments, and we're going to consume less. So I think there's a good argument that the opposite would take place, that economic growth would probably flourish, and it would be not just like short-term growth where like the Fed prints a bunch of money and Zoom stock goes up and GameStop goes up. It's going to be more that we invest in good investments that create real capital and real resources and real software and real hardware in the world, and then that makes the world a better place 5 years from now.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. I think that pretty much sums it up, how this thing would probably play out, because obviously with an inflationary money, it's not working. It's not working, and why keep doing this thing that's not working? It doesn't make sense. There's another quote here in your report that says the discovery of Bitcoin in January 2009 ultimately created a new economic reality. It's a novel tool for savings, trade, and economic calculation. If you ignore it and continue saving in inferior assets at high valuations, your economic competitors will adopt it and will outcompete you. What kind of jumped off the screen for me was this term, or this not term, but this phrase, economic reality, a new economic reality. What is that new economic reality that Bitcoin created?
Yeah. So one of the examples I used in the report, and got this from Stafadine, is like gunpowder. It's like if you are a civilization out there and you're using bow and arrows and your enemy civilization adopts or discovers gunpowder, then it doesn't matter if you like disapprove gunpowder. Doesn't matter if you disagree with gunpowder. Doesn't matter if you like ignore it and you deny that it exists. Like gunpowder now exists. They can come over and they can quickly kill you if they wanted to. I think Bitcoin is no different from an economic perspective. It's obviously not a weapon. It's obviously not going to hurt anybody. But from an economic perspective, where you do have profits and losses, Bitcoin is a new tool that we can use to evaluate profits and losses. So, if you're in Weimar, Germany or whatnot, and you buy something one week and then you sell it the next week for a higher price, well, maybe you weren't actually doing well as a business. Maybe like the money just got debased. So like you bought a house for 100 units of the Weimar German mark or whatever it was, and then the next week you sold it for 1,000. Like you didn't get a 10x on your investment. You did pretty bad actually, potentially, if the currency inflated more than that. To some extent, like that's what the dollar is today. Obviously, much slower pace, thankfully. Where again, like the dollar is designed to debase against basic consumer goods. If you look at like M2 or M3 growth over the last 50 years, it's growing at like a compound annual growth rate. The supply of money is growing at a compound annual growth rate of like 7 or 8%. So like the dollar is getting debased. And now that we have Bitcoin, which is this monetary tool that doesn't get debased, it's a new way to evaluate profits and losses to where, in Weimar, Germany, if you bought the house for 100 and sold it for 1,000, maybe in Bitcoin terms, if Bitcoin had existed, maybe you bought the house for 100 and sold it for 95. And it's like, was that a good investment? No, that was a terrible investment. But the monetary unit that you're using at the time back then, or in dollars today, you might be confused and think you made a great investment. I think that's what a lot of people have been doing for the last 50 years is they've been speculating on a bunch of different real estate, stocks, gold, whatever. They think they're making great investments, but in reality, we're just wasting and allocating a lot of capital incorrectly, and people should just be saving Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin is this new economic reality that will help them see that, hey, I bought I bought Apple for 100 sats, and 5 years later, now Apple's only worth 20 sats. Like I'm down 80%. This is actually not good. And so I think that's kind of the economic reality of Bitcoin. It's like it's the one best money, and there's not really much you can do to ignore. You can ignore it, but like it's still going to be reality. Like the guy in Weimar, Germany, could have ignored that their unit was hyperinflating, but that just led him to make a ton of bad investments, and he should have just been holding gold or something else.
So last question I want to ask you is, given all of the amazing innovations and discoveries through human history, you got things like penicillin. I mean, I was thinking about penicillin the other day. How many lives has penicillin saved like today? Probably, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives were saved as a result of that. And we have air conditioning, which is maybe my favorite one. Anesthetics. When you have think about this. When you have surgery, you don't feel it. Yeah. That is insane. That is crazy. That's huge. Given all of the stuff, where do you think Bitcoin ranks in terms of potential to improve life?
It's a really good question. I think if we're right about Bitcoin, like in the way that I've kind of been talking about it for the last hour, I would probably put it as number one, just because I think free markets and capitalism encourage actual proper economic incentives. And if we are in the process of discovering a new money and it's perfectly scarce, it's not perfect money, but it's perfectly scarce, then I think that will completely change like how capital gets allocated throughout the world, and probably leads to like massive economic growth. And I think money is something that people think about in the sense that they go to work every day and they spend money and they have a 401k or whatnot, but they don't necessarily think about it in the sense of like what is money. But people still think about it a lot, and it affects people's lives very greatly, potentially more than a lot of other technologies that are out there. And if we have discovered this perfectly scarce money, then I think that, it's going to be a complete game changer for what it enables society to create and how society like allocates or not allocates, but gets molded around the world in the future. I mean, like we're talking about disrupting governments to some extent in the way that they exist today. Not necessarily that governments won't exist, but like the way that, governments may not be able to print their money anymore. Like that's going to be a pretty transformative deal if that actually happens. So I think it's massive. I think it's potentially number one.
Okay, Joe Burnett, thanks so much for coming on the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. Where can people find you and download? Well, I'll put the link for the download for the report, but where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it. You can definitely go find me on Twitter. I'm at III Capital, or you can type in Joe Burnett. Watch out for the imposters, the impersonators out there. You can also find me on YouTube, Joe Burnett on YouTube, Joe Burnett Bitcoin. And then, yeah, if you're just listening to this podcast, potentially, you can go to unchained.com/melting and you can download the report there.
Okay, thanks so much. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, follow, do all the things. They're free to do, and it helps get this podcast in front of more eyes. Appreciate everybody out there supporting the podcast. Until next time, grace and peace. Bitcoin Well is a non-custodial Bitcoin platform in Canada and the USA. That means every single Satoshi you buy goes straight to your self-custody. They offer free withdrawals, a simple 1% spread, and they have the Bitcoin Wishing Well, where you can win up to 1 million Satoshis by earning points and throwing the coin in the well. In fact, you get 5 coin tosses to the Bitcoin Wishing Well when you sign up at bitcoinwell.com/pastorcoin.